Hey, hi, and hello. It is Capital 10 again, and today we're treading similar waters. In case you haven't seen it yet, I've already created a list of my top 10 most played Switch games. Please excuse the shameless self-plug, but you should definitely check that video out as well. In the case that you don't though, just know that I'm looking at the system's internal hour counter to see what games I've played the most throughout my time with the PlayStation 4 and 5. But thankfully, with this console, the precision of the counter comes down to the hour instead of showing multiples of 5, so I don't have to worry about a tie this time. That being said, I'm going to put in a caveat and switch to a round which I'll address later down the road. And I'm going to ignore one game entirely for reasons I'll address whenever it becomes relevant. And finally, no major spoilers in this video. With all those disclaimers out of the way, let's jump right into it. Number 10 is Danganronpa 1-2 Reload. Once again, I find a disproportionate amount of my time consumed due to my inability to read. Just imagine how horribly things tend to go wrong when I'm making my way through these scripts. Admittedly, I'm not much for visual novels. In fact, this is my first one, but after watching the anime, I had to give it a go. And I'm so glad I did because this duo of games is astounding. The characters enthrall me with how lovable they are, and the games really capitalize on tugging your heartstrings when some of those characters are taken away. It made me care in a way that few video game experiences have. If only the third game could live up to how good these were. That's right, I said it, V3 is lackluster. Good thing these two were more than enough to captivate me. Number 9 is Warriors Orochi 4 Ultimate. It shouldn't be a secret at this point that I love me some Dynasty Warriors, and although my experience with Samurai Warriors isn't as extensive, I think it's quality as well, so when you put them together, it's a match made in heaven. Granted, the plot of these spin-offs typically fly off the rails with ancient gods pitting mortals against one another as well as themselves, but thankfully, I'm here more for the gameplay and spectacle. I know the gameplay for these games isn't everyone's cup of tea, but boy does it provide me with some much needed catharsis from time to time, and the pretty colors really get those neurons firing. It's a perfect game to zone out while testing out all the characters, and with over 170 characters, that'll keep me entertained for a while. Number 8 is Yakuza Like a Dragon. It really shouldn't be a surprise to see an RPG on the list of games someone's played for a long time. But how weird is it that Yakuza fits into that category? Now, confession, this is my first Yakuza game because someone lied on a forum telling me I could start with this entry and not miss anything. How dare they, because there are references and spoilers everywhere. But that gives me a unique perspective on this game, and from an outsider's opinion, this title is phenomenal. It really boils down to following the antics of Ichiban Kasuga, a hero in every sense of the word. I can't stress enough how lovable of a character this himbo is, along with a wonderful secondary cast so he doesn't have to carry the team. Even though there are some questionable bosses during the campaign, I persevered so I could finish the story, and I'm so glad I did. By all accounts, this game should not have worked, but it absolutely beat the odds. Number 7 is Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Hey, 7 is 7, that's nice. I'll be honest right now and say I don't do horror games. I love horror movies, but the minute you ask me to participate, I'm out. And yet, I felt a magnetism toward this game that I just can't explain. If I were to try though, I'd say it's the simplicity of it all. Despite the numerous homages to horror legends that came before it, I find that the game itself favors a nice and concise plot. You're in a house of horrors and you need to get out. It really doesn't deviate from that track, but rather adds elements on top to see how you deal with the ramping insanity. And the replayability is what earns it a spot on this list as you take on various challenges both for trophies and to unlock fun gadgets and gear to enhance your next playthrough. Also, this is my first Resident Evil, but unlike Yakuza, it actually does feel like a standalone entry. Number 6 is Ghost of Tsushima. Okay, here's the caveat. This was technically 1 hour less than Resident Evil, but thinking back on the admittedly poor loading times on the PS4 version of Biohazard, and how fast Ghost loaded, especially on the PS5, I had to give this one the edge. So, how did it end up on the list? Simply put, I've spent hours upon hours just staring at how beautiful this game is. You'd think that a lack of HUD would be disorienting, but the game's use of wind to guide you efficiently replaces a map in favor of really showing off the artwork that they've plastered across your screen. And once you've found your way through the Suki Fields or the Golden Forest, you get to the combat where you're provided a multitude of weapons at your disposal to work with. Or, you could sneak into a camp and assassinate people with a really fleshed out stealth mechanic. Both are equally satisfying to execute, and super cinematic to boot. Number 5 is Mega Man Legacy Collection 2. I'm going to catch some flack for admitting this, but my favorite Mega Man game by far is 8, which is considered the black sheep of the franchise. I can't help it, it's a guilty pleasure of mine. But the old disc is starting to give out, so when I discovered that I could purchase it for modern consoles along with 3 other titles, 2 of which I'd never had the chance to try out, it was an instant purchase. And to my surprise, Mega Man 8 didn't even end up being the time-consuming title on the docket. Don't get me wrong, I've still played that one over and over again, but Mega Man 9 turned out to be something very special as well. It harkens back to the original run of titles, but with an additional endless mode that I've sunk so much time into trying to beat my best score. These 2 titles would be enough to make me happy about my transaction, but the wild thing is, it's only half of the collection, so there's plenty more fun to be had. Number 4 is Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. The Bandicoot is back, baby. The nostalgia factor is strong with this title, as the Crash Bandicoot series, or at least the Naughty Dog batch, were huge aspects of my childhood. 2 and 3 especially catered to my blossoming love of video games during my formative years. And this game, which I purchased on day 1, has absolutely recaptured that magic. This selection of titles both stays true to the source material while providing some nice quality of life touches to the first 2/3 of the package, originating from the tail end of the trilogy. For example, bouncy crates with 10 Wumpa fruits used to take 10 jumps to break in Crash 1 and 2, but they take 5 jumps in 3, so the insane versions retrofitted the former for convenience and consistency across the board. And that's just a minor adjustment, with more substantial additions existing as well. Plus, we got 2 brand new levels. This game kickstarted the remake renaissance we've experienced in the last few years, and I couldn't be happier that Crash got to be the frontrunner. Number 3 is Dead Rising. So, in the console war of PlayStation versus Xbox, I left Microsoft by the wayside. While I stand by that decision, I do admit that I missed out on some quality exclusives. One of those was Dead Rising. I played the sequel, but always wondered what I was missing from the original. Thankfully, as part of the 10-year anniversary of the franchise celebration, the first 2 titles were remastered and ported to PlayStation 4, so I finally got my hands on the game. This was actually the first game I played on PS4, and what a title to start with. Even 16 years later, I'd say it still holds up. There's such an appeal to having almost any object available to you to be used as a weapon. Plus, the stringent time frame you're allotted adds a great sense of accomplishment to completing the multitude of missions presented to you. And the psychopaths deserve their own shout out. I understand zombies aren't real, but speaking hypothetically, I feel that these bosses would be incredibly accurate portrayals of how people would snap mentally given the situation. Really, the only complaint is that the survivor AI makes escorting them pretty challenging in an unfair kind of way. But again, I can't argue that people wouldn't naturally panic and make mistakes like that in this scenario, so I'm willing to live with it. Number 2 is Dead Rising 2, Off the Record. Oh look, it's Dead Rising again. It's almost like it's one of my favorite series or something. Anyway, as I said before, my first dive into this franchise was the second title, and while I had fun with it, I wasn't sure if I could justify purchasing it again for the new generation, given that this alternative was also available. For those who don't know, this game is essentially the same as Dead Rising 2, but with the protagonist of the first title taking center stage, along with a few plot differences, new toys to play with, a new amusement park area, and a sandbox mode. If you want to think of this as a definitive edition, I suppose that's a reasonable opinion to have, although I personally don't feel that way. So, what about the game draws me in? Well, the combo weapons are the primary point. You can still pick up just about anything, but now specific items can combine together to make wild and wacky gadgets to mow down the even larger hordes of zombies this time. It's innovative, but not to the point of being ridiculous like in the future installments of the series. Granted, I haven't played them, but I know. We all know. Anyway, along with the weapons pulling their weight, the psychopaths are a great group of bosses again, and the time limit is yet again tough but fair. Plus, the sandbox mode, you don't have to worry about a time limit if that's not your thing. And it's only side content, so it doesn't detract from the story mode itself, meaning you can really play your way. And finally, at number 1, we have Persona 5 Royal. It's not even close. Here's where I ignored one of the games on the list, by the way. I decided that I didn't need the vanilla version of Persona 5 along with its definitive edition. Just know that if I had, it would have found its way into number 3 on the list, right in between the Dead Risings. So why did I pour so much time into both versions anyway? Well, simply put, this title is outstanding. The style, which should be self-evident from the footage, is the main attraction. The game oozes personality and charm, which makes up for the last gen presentation. I'm not someone who needs the cutting edge in terms of graphics, so the fact that the art direction is so prominent means that I can gladly accept what is essentially a port of a PS3 game. And the music also contributes to the overall vibe. A majority of the soundtrack is filled with bangers that I could listen to on repeat for hours, which I pretty much have seeing as how long I've played the game. Aside from the aesthetic, there's also a perfect gameplay mix of dungeon crawling with a solid combat system, as well as a life sim with a mostly wonderful supporting cast. By the way, that's just the base game. Royal excels because it refined the experience with even more aesthetic accomplishments, better combat system, and improved daily life segments. Then, it adds new locations, characters, and expands the story for longer play, so you've got the definitive experience. So, there's my list. Once again, I hope y'all are okay with me doing my own thing for a while by making a countdown like this. At the end of the day, this is just a fun little side project for me where I get to reflect on my past playthroughs with those ever so lovely rose-tinted glasses. It's nice to speak fondly of something without having to get too analytical. Don't worry though, more analytical content is on its way. As for now though, I'd love to hear what your most played games on the PlayStation 4 and 5 are. Are there any upcoming titles that you think will top your list? Let me know down below. And that's all from me this time. If you liked what I talked about, then consider leaving a like on the video, and if you want to continue the discussion, leave a comment of your thoughts about the subject. But please be respectful. Did you like what I had to say or how I said it? Why not subscribe? If you didn't like it, thanks for hearing me out this long anyway. This is Capital 10 signing off. See y'all some other time.